I voted to give the president military authority to go into Iraq. I was wrong. I was dead wrong. I made a miscalculation of judgment. It's a vote I regret deeply. Deeply. But what I desperately believe the country needs to come to grips with is the understanding that the Iraqi government has yet to make the political calculations, has yet to make those very difficult choices that a mature government ultimately must make in order to govern its own people. But think about where we as a country are, and ironically where Iraq is. We have our nation's largest budget deficits in the history of our nation and the history of the world. The Iraqi people, remarkably, have a budget surplus because the cost of oil that they are now pumping has skyrocketed. So why is it that we, the American people, continue to subsidize the building of Iraq's infrastructure, whether it be roads or hospitals or schools, when in fact they have their own resources to do so? Now, I believe we should have stopped the war long ago. I believe our men and women in uniform performed valiantly and they achieved their military purpose. We ought now, in my view, to be removing between 1 and 2 brigades a month. It'll take us about 16 months to 18 months to remove an overwhelming majority of our forces. Al-Qaeda is in Iraq. It wasn't before we went, but it is now. But the experts say the Al-Qaeda forces are less than 4,000. We need to have a strike force ready to, in fact, take care of Al-Qaeda when we can in an effective fashion, either in Iraq or in the neighborhood. We need to protect our diplomats. We need to protect our embassy. We need to help the Iraqi government build its political infrastructures, but the men and women in American uniform need to come home now. And when we do that, in my view, we need to take another look at Afghanistan and understand that that's the war that needs to be won, that is in fact the true danger in that region to America and our allies. And the commanders on the ground tell us in the Congress that with an additional 10 to 15,000 troops, a combination of American and NATO troops, that in a relatively short period of time that can be won in a decisive fashion and in fact be a tremendous blow to Al-Qaeda and a tremendous victory with respect to the war on terror. That simultaneously needs to happen. But let us not in any way confuse who is the winner from the war in Iraq. The winner in the war in Iraq is Iran. I'm sad to say. Before we went into Iraq, Iran was a mid-level power. Today it is the prominent power in the Middle East. They are near becoming a nuclear power in the Middle East. Iran now funds Hezbollah in Lebanon at a much greater rate. The instability that we witness in Lebanon is a direct result of Iranian engagement in Lebanon. Hamas's growth in Gaza is a reflection upon their continued and greater support from Tehran. Hamas leaders train in Iran. Hamas gets financial support from Iran. The instability at times that we see in Egypt is influenced greatly by Iran. The divide within Iraq is influenced more and more greatly with Iran. Again, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, it should bewilder every American that here we are with 160,000 troops in Iraq. We bring down Saddam Hussein, and the president of Iraq, who is supposedly our friend, invites President Ahmadinejad to Baghdad, and there he is welcoming him. What did we fight for? What do we continue to fight for if that's what's happening in this region? We, in my view, need to do two things. Get out of Iraq, like I said earlier. But we also need to directly engage with the country of Iran from a position of strength. This idea that America can somehow continue the policy of George Bush, which is not engage our opponents, not engage directly those that wish to do us great harm, only serves the interests of rogue nations such as Iran. The fact of the matter is, although the President doesn't admit it, and John McCain doesn't admit it, President Bush authorized his ambassador in Iraq to directly engage with Iran on two issues. Those issues being Iran's cooperation with us in Afghanistan and Iran's involvement with insurgents in Iraq. But the two issues that we must engage with Iran, not because we have any illusions about the goodwill of Iran, just the opposite, but the way in which we thwart Iran's ability to become a nuclear power is not by continuing to sit on our hands and say, no, you won't become a nuclear power, but yet not have the ability or leverage to create an economic sanction program that will actually prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power. We need to sit down with the Iranians and specifically make demands with respect to their nuclear program, with respect to their enrichment of uranium, and with respect to their continual funding of terror. And do what Tom Friedman has outlined in two of his most recent articles. And what he has outlined, Tom Friedman, is a program where the American president, before actually sitting down with the Iranian regime, go to our allies in Europe and effectively say, now the United States will engage. But we must engage from a position of strength. We will demand of the Iranians that they cease their enrichment program, that they cease their financial support of terror. But the Iranians must know that we, the Americans, have with us the support of our allies in London, in Paris, and in Berlin. And simultaneously, the President of the United States must go to Moscow, and must go to Beijing, and must go to New Delhi, and must go to Riyadh, and express the commitment of America to put it on the line for diplomacy. And understand that when we do, that if the Iranians blink and do not succumb to a very reasonable offer, that we, still the single most important military power on earth, will demand of our allies in Europe, will demand of Russia, will demand of Beijing, will demand of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and the entire Gulf, that they stand with us. And the worst thing that the Iranian regime fears is not the policy of George Bush and John McCain, my friends. The worst fear that the Iranian regime fears is an America that engages in a way in which our allies say, hooray, America is back. That's what the Irish world fears. The finest county commissioner in the world has joined us, Commissioner Bert Aaron. Let me stop by addressing Mrs. Wells' article that she handed me. And again, I understand